The gloriously wild country around Cadair Idris in North Wales, which defies any railway builder. In the wildest part, a monument in a ruined cottage, from where in 1800 young Mary Jones set out to walk barefoot over the savage hills to beg a Bible from the Reverend Thomas Charles at Bala, 25 miles away, and so inspired the creation of the British and Foreign Bible Society. No roads, certainly no railways here in those days. It wasn't until the 1860s that railways started to push inland from the North Wales coast into secluded valleys like this at Dinas Mawddwy in the Arran Range. And it was the slate explosion that sent them there. Quarries opened all over the North Wales mountains to meet the ever-increasing demand for slate roofs in industrial England. And usually, only the narrow-gauge lines could twist their way into the newly lucrative wilderness. And today, with tourists not slates, the little trains are back in business. There's even been one restarted at Meirion Mill in Dinas Mawddwy itself. On the other side of the Arran Mountains from Dinas Mawddwy is Bala Lake, Llyn Tegid in Welsh, the largest natural lake in Wales, and along it runs one of the most individual of our great little trains. On the map you can see that the line now runs for the whole length of the lake. The starting point is Llanuwchlyn. In English that's the church at the far end of the lake. Up until 1966, Llanuwchlyn was a station on the standard gauge line of British Rail. But by 1967, it seemed that the evocative sound of steam would no longer be heard among the high hills that guard Bala Lake. But they reckoned without the man I always think of as Versatile George, Mr. George Barnes. He can turn his hand to everything. He can drive the engine. Worried about tickets? George collects them. You stroll over for a cup of tea, who serves you one guess only.
Would you like to come inside where it feels a bit warmer? It's not very... Go ahead.
And it's George who waves you off from the signal box. It was George Barnes and one or two other enthusiasts living in the Bala area who felt that the railway along Bala Lake should not die. They were firmly backed by the chairman of the old Meirionydd Council, and a society was formed. The standard gauge had gone, but why not put a narrow gauge along the track? So the Bala Lake began its ever more successful career.
Oh, morning.
Good to see you again.
Yes, very nice
grand
to see
morning
you.
too.
Lovely, yes.
How was the line gone?
Very well indeed, actually. We've had a very good summer. The our take-ins, traffic and so forth has gone up immensely.
You've really been packing your
Yes, this last 10 weeks it's done very well.
Any new changes?
We've extended another mile.
Another mile in?
Yes, we've gone beyond Llangower to a place called Panterhen Felin, the old mill in the hollow.
Your Welsh is improving.
Oh yes, we keep improving. The syllables are quite, I can get over them quite well. We're hoping to lay a mile and a half of track again, starting at the end of this month, extending through to Pennybont, and then we should be on 4.5 miles right to the end of the lake, within half a mile of Bala Centre.
And if real bad weather goes in, what if snow comes?
Well, one of those things round here, the main road over by the lake over there, that gets blocked, dips in the hill. The back road here, that gets blocked in 2 or 3 places, and the old railwaymen tell me that this length kept very clear. So I'm hoping that the first blizzard we have, we shall have a train from here at 8 o'clock in the morning through to Bala with the line open.
You're really rubbing your hands, you're waiting for that blizzard to come.
I'm looking forward to that.
It'll really prove the value of steam then.
Yeah, and the railway.
True railway enthusiasts are in love with every detail. George can feel a wild romantic interest in the point system of his railway.
I'm very interested in railway signalling and lock mechanisms, so I revel in doing that, irrespective of whether I'm told to or not. There is an interesting point there. In days gone by, Saxby and Farmer was the firm. Old man Saxby was the bloke who designed a patent. He patented it. This is in the early days of railways. They first of all rodded the points up to try and get all the points coupled to one place. One man could control them, you see. But they came up against the obstacle. As soon as the sun came out, the rods expanded and the point blades started to move. So, of course, there were derailments, or there was a man running up and down adjusting rodding all the time. So that wasn't on. Anyway, old man Saxby put his brains together and weighed this lot up. And he came out with this crafty idea where he split the length of rodding between the points and the signal and the lever frame in 2, found the middle, and he put a cross shaft underneath the rails. There's one down there. Now, he then had 1/2 of his rodding pushing and the other pulling. And then, as the expansion, when the sun came out, one pushed and the other pulled, and the rod in the centre just took up the slack, the expansion. Either end never moved. So, of course, you could pull the points over, and the blades were stayed in the perfect position they were set in. The lever was in the same position, and the expansion and contraction was taken up by that, and your points were perfect, either the middle of the night in a freezing cold day or in midsummer, you see.
And I believed every word George said. Here's an air view of the whole course of the line. It's now just over 5 miles long. The Bala Lake is lucky in one respect. It runs over reasonably level ground. It's got a few cuttings, but no expensive tunnel to keep up. It's unique, too, in that it was the first company to be officially registered in the Welsh language. Its correct title is Rheilffordd Llyn Tegid, the RLT. Mr. Barnes immediately became its manager. The first section lies along the level ground from Llanuwchlyn to the head of the lake. The engine is Maid Marian. She has already passed over George Barnes's beloved points, and, catching his enthusiasm, I can tell railway fans that his signal frame is one of the only 2 GWR double-twist locking frames of an 1890 design still in existence. The other one, if you wish to go on pilgrimage, is at Brimbo East in North Wales. Personally, I can't wait to get there. gauge really is a narrow one. Now, I'd better be accurate. It's exactly 1 foot 11 and 5/8 inches, 60 centimeters, for a non-expert like myself, a nominal 2 feet. The train now runs past an old halt, flag station. It wouldn't have done so with such ease in the old days, because the right of stopping the train here, if required, was written into the Act of Parliament, which originally allowed the construction of the line. This rather Wild West-looking structure was put up for the convenience of the guests of Sir Watkin Williams Wynn, for the train ran over the land of the historic Wynn estate. The Wynn family was so powerful that in the 18th century, the reigning Sir Watkin was known as the Prince in Wales. There were also Wynn family houses and shooting boxes scattered over the landscape with a lavish hand, including the charming lakeside mansion of Llanllyn, to which the guests were taken across from the halt by steam launch when the flag was raised. Now the house belongs to the Welsh League of Youth, Urdd Gobaith Cymru, and young Welshmen and women enjoy the outdoor sports where Sir Watkin's guests once had exclusive possession. In the background, beyond the lake, are the great hills, Cadair Idris, and the shapely Arran Benllyn, the peak at the top of the lake. And as Maid Marian pulled her train at the legal limit of 12 miles an hour along the lake edge, George Barnes gave me an affectionate review of the little engine's history.
Well, during the 1960s, the Dinorwic slate quarries, they were being slowly run down. Now, it is a very interesting history, is this, because the old man, Asherton Smith, who started the Dinorwic quarries way back in about the 1840s, his ancestors and different families they married into, their attitude was that what was good enough for grandfather was good enough for them. And they tended to never change anything all down the ages. And they got these little steam locos running from 1870 onwards, and they kept them. The last ones were built, I think, about 1933. And they kept them running right to the end of the Dinorwic quarry workings in about 1969. Most of the other quarries of North Wales had gone over to little diesels long ago, and of course the little end steamers have been scrapped, you see, so we have these people to thank for their policy that kept these little engines going.
From now on, the train and the lake are inseparable. And on a still day like this, you can almost believe all the old legends about how the lake was formed. How the site was once occupied by the palace of a wicked prince who was celebrating the birth of his son, when his harpist heard a voice pronouncing, "Vengeance is mine." He turned and saw a small bird beckoning him. He followed the bird, but then thinking he'd been foolish, he tried to return. Next morning, he reached the spot where the palace had stood. All he saw was this placid lake and his harp floating on it. There are fishermen's tales here too. The lake has a mysterious fish called the gwyniad, a species of salmonid, which is rarely taken and lives in the deepest part of the lake. The train is now coming up towards the old station of Llangower. It's the picnic site, but Llangower will remind every Welshman of the old folk song, "Farewell to the parish of Llangower, and Bala fair and beautiful." I dare say many a local sang it to himself in the early days of the railway in mid-Victorian times, as he went off to seek his fortune in England. how the lake has changed since the day, now over 100 years ago, when the first railway, the old Bala line, was built along its southeastern shore. It's become a great place for the sailing fraternity, and in fact, national dinghy sailing championships are regularly held here. I wonder, as they study the fitful winds that come rushing down from the mountains unexpectedly, if they remember another of the old stories about Bala Lake, that the waters of the River Dee flow right through it without mingling with the waters of the lake. Our train has now gone well past halfway and is approaching the old terminus of the line. The little train has steadily grown in popularity. When it began 4 years ago, 4,000 passengers were carried. Last season, 23,000 were taken along the lake, drawn by the power and charm of steam. So listen for a moment to Maid Marian's puffing music. Bala Lake may have owed its inspiration to men like George Barnes, and he's its general manager who keeps it going. But he'd be the first to admit that, like all the little trains of Wales, he has to have his fellow enthusiasts close behind him. The local people gave it a great welcome, and above all, the volunteers came forward to help to build and run it. A successful narrow gauge railway is always the result of close cooperation between the amateur enthusiasts prepared to give their time and labor and the professionals who have had long practical experience of the technical side of running a railway. In 1975, this was where the railway ended, at Pantahane Velin, the stream of the old mill. What expressive names the Rheilffordd Llyntegid has inherited. The trip offered was delightful enough. 3 miles along the lake, passing a delicious picnic spot, and then from here, the return to Llanuwchlyn. But as long as there's a reasonable chance of extension, a narrow gauge railway cannot resist, as it were, going the limit, going to the end of the line. In late 1975, the big job began of laying the rails to the far end of the lake. This is what lay ahead of them. To reach the new terminus, bridges had to be cleared, sleepers had to be put down, and the rails laid. And this is where the new terminus now stands. But always as the dream, of course, there was the real terminus, the town of Bala itself. To reach it, the line would have to go across the new bridge and the new works built to regulate the flow of the River Dee out of the lake. But no doubt about it, Bala is the right true end of the line. All through the winter of 1975, the work went on to extend the line, at least to the end of the lake. The embankment, the course of the old BR line was still there, but the old standard gauge rails had been pulled up in 1967 when the line closed. The narrow gauge rails had to be laid along the same route for 1.5 miles. Here, RLT were lucky. In their employ, they already had 2 experts, Mr. Howell Jones, a former BR Permanent Way Inspector, and Mr. Jack Hughes, who used to be exactly the same thing on the old GWR. And they had already been busy in laying the first section of the line, and now just the 2 of them, all on their own, tackled the final section to the end of the lake. They didn't have vast modern machinery, they worked by hand, but they knew all the tricks of the trade. So correcting the lay of the track, straightening out the rails, they took the permanent way steadily on through the winter until it's now at the northeast end of the lake. And Mr. Jones and Mr. Hughes, also for good measure, just built the terminus station by themselves. They, with George Barnes, are the only 3 full-time employees of the railway. They use the diesel for the work, but steam will come back into its own now that the track is completed. Maid Marian will run here with her new companion, the charmingly named Holy War. They both came from the huge De Norway quarries at Llanberis, where they puffed along dizzily narrow ledges hundreds of feet up. But in 1961, a rockfall marooned Holy War on a ledge from which it was lifted by aerial ropeway. So along this track will run the only engine that can claim to have flown through the air. Holy War might have had divine aid for its flight, for it's now owned by a vicar. And who knows, there may come a day when the Bala Lake will have its terminus in the town of Bala itself. And a delightful terminus it would be. Bala is a little town with a great tradition. It's a stronghold of Welsh speaking. And in the main street, over a bank, is the terminus of another journey, one with which we began our program. We saw the site of the cottage where Mary Jones set out in 1800 to walk here barefooted, and here's the house where the Reverend Thomas Charles actually presented her with a historic Bible in Welsh, which inspired the formation of the British and Foreign Bible Society. Charles was one of the great founding fathers of the Methodists in North Wales, and deservedly has a statue to his memory outside Capel Tegid. But does he deserve such a statue? Alas, I rate it as the second worst statue in Wales, although I'll admit there is a strong competition for the first place. Still, it does commemorate the vital presentation of the Bible and reminds us of a great career of a great man. But it was carved in, unfortunately, a shocking period for the art of sculpture, a glorified monumental mason's masterpiece. Not far away is Bala, the old Norman castle mound, and in the 18th century it was a great showplace for the hordes of women who gathered here every fine day to knit the white woolen stockings for which Bala was famous. As for the stitches, well, I'm told not much pearl and a lot of plain. But they had a royal patron. George III wore no other. Bala is not actually on the Dee. The nearest river is the Tryweryn, which runs down to join the Dee just below the exit to the lake. United waters then flow through a gloriously beautiful valley down to Llangollen. Just outside Bala is Llanfor Church, and here lies one of the most attractive eccentrics of Victorian Wales, Squire Lloyd Price, who lived in the nearby estate of Rhywlas. He was a great sportsman, a patron of rural industry, and he even set up a company to make Welsh whiskey, which flourished until the First World War. And here, too, is the grave of a man who, I'm sure, would have appreciated Squire Lloyd Price's product, a remarkable old soldier, John Williams, of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers, who was 87 when he died, but was proud to have fought for his country in 27 battles. Some of them, like Albuera and Salamanca, amongst the toughest in the Peninsular War. And he ended up fighting and surviving at Waterloo. I wonder what gallant John Williams would have said if he'd heard of the gift of a cask of Squire Lloyd Price's Welsh whiskey to King Edward VII as Prince of Wales. It produced one of the most tactful of royal letters. It is His Royal Highness's intention always to keep Welsh whiskey in his cellars, which is exactly what he did. The squire naturally found himself in financial difficulties. He boldly put all he had on one horse, Bendigo, for the Cambridgeshire in 1887. Bendigo romped home, and the grateful squire gave the horse a happy home in his old age. Over the mausoleum, an inscription tells the story. As to my latter end I go to seek my jubilee. I bless the good horse Bendigo, who built this tomb for me. And as we take a last look across the lake, who can doubt that Squire Lloyd Price would have been a staunch supporter of the Rheilffordd Llyn Tegid, the dream line of Bala Lake. He'd have gone all out, with a glass of Welsh whisky in hand, to toast the little train's eventual arrival at Bala itself. George Barnes is sure it will. And the sound of Maid Marian and Holy War will come echoing in triumph across these quiet waters of Bala Lake. George might have had some small doubts at first if his engines would stand up to extra work. After all, they were originally built to shunt little wagons over short distances. But George has a secret weapon. He's fitted Maid Marian with new piston rings, a 3-element mechanical lubricator, and piston spindles metal sprayed. So, look out, Bala.
But keeping along the edge of the lake is far better from the visitor's point of view and the scenery. Once you turn towards Loch Cafe and get on that end of the lake, you can see the Cadair Idris, you see, right through to Dalgetlis. So we're looking forward to that.
Welshpool Station. Welshpool, historic town, once the centre of the old Welsh Principality of Powys. And from the station platform you can see in the far distance the towers of Powys Castle coming peeping up among the trees. But of course, railway enthusiasts don't worry about that. They know it as the starting point of one of the most delightful of the little lines of Wales, the Welshpool and the Llanfair-Caerhainon light railway. As a matter of fact, it started from just across the tracks over there, and I'm delighted to tell you, though it doesn't start from here anymore, the Llanfair and Welshpool railway still exists, and it flourishes.
Panting up the mountains, chugging through the vales, go the gallant little railway. Lines of Wales, the firebox glows, the pistons gleam, the engines puffing celestial steam, and the Welshpool Llanfair trains on hand to take you through the kindly borderland. And the land of my fathers looks twice as fine. You see it from a carriage on a railway line. Where is this delectable railway? The map shows the green edge of the Welsh border, and that wriggling caterpillar is the line, starting now near the edge of Welshpool and going deep into the lost hills of mid-Wales. I said it once started at Welshpool Station itself, and the old track is still there in part, grass-grown, running around the backs of the houses, right in the middle of the town. But when the line first closed in 1956, nobody thought it would ever return. The local brass band played Handel's Funeral March as the final train puffed along these lines, and the authorities gave up. A main road and a roundabout cut across Raven Square. The motor car seemed to have conquered forever, and you can drive there now and never realize that you are changing gear over the first section of the proud Welshpool and Llanfair Railway. The train once puffed along this street, and the railway hut at the bottom there is now the headquarters of the Salvation Army. Well, they may have had a service for fallen railways. But just on the further side of Raven Square, here where the buffers stand, the line starts again. And on it, the new owners of the Welshpool and Llanfair are determined that the train shall run again. Oh, the undergrowth is thick, but the railway enthusiasts plunge into it to find the rusted points. And they use a little light diesel engine to push along the disused track to start the work that will eventually bring the line the whole way back to Welshpool. Oh, I admit my heart goes out to these enthusiasts. They're not professionals. The line has been restored by the voluntary work of the steam railway fans. They're simply people who are enchanted by the sight and sound of steam. And they run the railway as a labour of love. Very successfully, too, coming down on weekends, clearing the undergrowth, relaying the track, and sleeping in old railway coaches at Llanfair. The company solicitor has his weekend doss down in this old plate layer's hut. They've got the whole line now running again from Llanfair to Sylvain Halt. At Sylvain, the engines are turned around by a complicated piece of shunting that gladdens the heart of the amateur railwayman. The engines, or two of them at any rate, the Earl and the Countess, date from the very beginning of the line and are still going strong, and they're the main target for visitors' photographs. They must have been really brilliantly designed, for before they got to Sylvain, they had to climb the Golva Bank, one of the steepest gradients on any railway line in Britain, 1 in 30 no less. The engines were built in 1902, and in those days they cost £1,500 each. And when the new company was formed, it got one of the engines from British Rail for just over £600. What do they like to drive? Well, according to Frank Cooper, engine driver and insurance broker from Birmingham,
they're not like a car. There's no key that you turn and it switches on. This morning, for example, it's taken about 2 hours to raise steam. Another day it might take 2.5 hours. Another day it only takes an hour and a half. And once it's down the line, the coal might burn well, it might not burn well, it might clinker, your fire might half go out. So you've got this constant battle of wits. This particular engine today, Earl's good. Countess's counterpart was a little bit more temperamental. I think it's probably because it was named after a lady.
What sort of countryside does the line run through? Well, I think it is still happily one of the least known, unspoilt, green, rural paradises I know of in Wales. It doesn't really go anywhere in a hurry. It doesn't want to, just like its train. A pattern of green fields at the bottom of the valley, and away in the background, the lovely hill pastures, speckled with sheep. Maybe that's the reason why the line never paid, except for a brief moment in World War I. The main customers were the farmers' wives going down to Welshpool Market, and the farmers loading sheep and fat cattle. The line was once the proud possessor of 8 sheep wagons, capable of carrying 25 sheep each. Not a very large capacity, and the original shareholders must have wondered as the flocks were loaded into the trains and then the engine went puffing through the green fields, whether they were not going down bleating into bankruptcy. They were rather glad to be taken over by the Cambrian, and the Cambrian was equally delighted to be swallowed by the GWR. And the shareholders got 24.5p for their pound shares, just like today. The gauge is 2 feet 6 inches, and this does allow the train almost to wriggle along between the hedges. Oh, this is a real country line. There are moments when you feel you can slip out and pick daisies and hop back on again. As the Earl waves its banner of steam amongst the trees, I think back to the first train, travelling this way in 1903, over 70 years ago, and all the high hopes it carried. The Prince of Wales feathers fixed onto both ends of the locomotive, and the motto on the boiler, "Success to the W&L Railway." The band in full dress uniform playing Men of Harlech. And the journey along this section made, as the local paper reported, in record time, at least 10 miles an hour. At Coppice Lane, the line crosses a little country road. Between you and me, it's not the busiest thoroughfare in Wales. I've never seen more than a car or two on it, and 3 stray sheep. But the Light Railways Act demands that a man with a red flag shall stand to warn the dense approaching traffic, and the Welsh Pool and Llanfair scrupulously observes the law. The next stop is the delightful and ancient village of Castell Carignan. This is the central point of the line at present, just over 4 miles from Llanfair. It is the proud possessor of a passing loop, a cattle dock, but no cattle to take on board, and a signal box. Now, so far, the line has passed over land which belonged, or once belonged, to the great Powys Castle estate. The Earl of Powys was a strong supporter of the original line, and the first engines were named the Countess and the Earl. And the splendours of Powys Castle itself are only a few miles away across the hills. One of the great castles of Wales. The old apartments were splendidly reconstructed in the late 17th century, and the gardens are elegantly formal in the classical style of the period. Terrace rising above flower-filled terrace. Chaste statues. Long alleys and close-cut privet hedges stretching away to flower beds, haunted by the most industrious bees in the business. And not so far away, over the brow of the hill, the little engines are puffing along as busy as the bees. Back to the train, waiting still at Castell Carignan station. And to a surprise. Not far from the station, Mrs. Elizabeth Ann Hughes of Pennebryn Farm is drawing a strange and fascinating discovery. This now rather tangled-up-looking farm building, with great timber posts but with a rough corrugated iron roofing, is far more ancient than it looks. Mrs. Hughes was trained as an artist, and she spotted these remarkable oak beams. They are characteristic of what are called aisled halls in the manor houses of the 13th and 14th century. This is the only one of its kind in Montgomeryshire, and the only other parts of the country where you find them are Suffolk and Norfolk and the Cheshire-Denbighshire border. The beams are carved and pegged together, and there are plenty of carpenter's marks on them. In those days, many craftsmen didn't write, so that they made circles and other marks to show how the beam should be fitted together. Of course, the story goes that Henry VII stayed the night here when he was marching through Wales on his way to Bosworth Field. Was there any place in mid-Wales where he didn't? Still, here it stands, a bit battered, but still a real medieval hall. Can we hope it'll be cared for and restored to its old splendour? Can we see the fire burning again in the wide medieval fireplace? Just as it's been made to burn bright again in the firebox of the gallant old locomotive, the Earl, as it puffs out of Castell Carignan. Joining me now on board, the Dowager Countess of Powys. I know she doesn't mind me saying that she's over 80, and her daughter, Lady Clive.
Here we go, Lady Powys. Not your first trip, though.
No, not in, by a long way. My husband and I very often came. He was particularly fond of the railway, and I've had many journeys on this beautiful railway.
It goes over a great part of your estate, though, doesn't it?
I think it does. I think that a great many years ago, Lord Pace at that time gave that part of the estate to the railway.
Lady Clive, it was your father-in-law, wasn't it, who actually cut the first sod in 1901.
Well, he didn't. It was his eldest son who cut the first sod, but he opened it, and I think they had a great opening with champagne in jugs all round, and then his son cut the first sod with a silver spade.
Oh, those were the days.
Yes, those were the days. But the present days of the Welsh Pool and Llanfair are surely very much better. It's not struggling along desperately to avoid bankruptcy as it did for many years when it first opened. This deep countryside, producing only agricultural traffic, timber and cattle and sheep, was probably the despair of the first promoters. But it's now the basis for the increasing success of the present railway. This is what the city-bred visitors come to enjoy. Not a car in sight, only the fields of corn and the green hills, the tall trees and the thick hedges. On this line, you not only take a ticket to scenery, but to serenity. Now, as the train puffs along, you can see that 3 of the coaches look very unlike anything you've seen on British lines. As a matter of fact, they are Austrian. They have the characteristic continental platforms before and behind. And they come from the Zillertalbahn. There are very friendly relations between the 2 preservation societies, and the coaches have come in very handy. Plenty of spy films with the hero being chased desperately by the Nazis or clinging precariously to the roof are just as likely to have been filmed not in the wilds of Bavaria and Switzerland, but here in the Gittings Farm field, alongside the happy little Llanfair Railway. As a matter of fact, the farmer at Gittings Farm wasn't altogether pleased when the line restarted. Would it disturb the cattle? But now he's one of its strongest supporters, and a well-established custom demands that every fireman or driver gives him a ceremonious wave of the cap as the train passes. But the job of fireman isn't just as simple as waving a cap.
For example, as a fireman, you can put almost anybody on the engine and you'll get there. You may not get there on time, you may not get there very well, but you will get there. But the real art of firing is to do it well, and that's very, very difficult indeed. To get there without blowing off steam, without using too much coal, without losing time, without worrying your driver in any way. And that's the challenge of it all, and I think that's what keeps a lot of us coming to the railway.
Cyfrynydd halt and the red flag out as the line goes over a country road. Llanfair is just over 2 miles away, but they're pretty eventful 2 miles. And in the early days of the railway, it would have cost you just over 2pence to cover them. For the Act established that the railway company should carry passengers at the rate of a penny per mile. Tell that to British Rail. But there are other serious hazards on the way. Gazing anxiously ahead, the driver and fireman await the deadly danger cry. The brakes are applied. The gallant train halts in the nick of time. Look ahead. Sheep on the line. On the way. Now, after Cyfrynydd, the line has been coming down towards the valley of the River Banwy. The Banwy rises away in a lonely part of the Mid Wales mountains and flows down to join the Vyrnwy, and together they flow into the Severn. Here, the drop down to the Banui itself is quite steep, and they had to build a small but very solid viaduct over a side stream. But after this first viaduct, the train must start to slow down quite a bit. There's a place ahead where care must be taken. Banui Bridge. And you look down from the bridge onto the clear, rippling waters of the Banui itself. And they look enchanting. So does the whole rich countryside, for that matter. No possible problems here, you'd think. But the Banui is a not-so-gay deceiver. In summer, it's a great trout and salmon stream. You could stand here drowsily casting a fly and let your eye travel down with the lulling sound of the water to the bridge. And then you get a reminder of the Banui's treachery. Two of the old piers have been replaced by steel constructions. The original piers were stone, but in December 1964, the Banui rose at an astonishing speed. It often rises 2 feet in an hour, but this time it surpassed itself in fury. When the piers went over, the Preservation Society might have gone over too. But with some help from the Royal Engineers, the Society restored the bridge, so now the trains ride on again in triumph towards Llanfair. The line goes past the old Henyath Mill. It's now a holiday home. But it dates back to 1827. Oh, they knew how to build solidly in those days. And the mill race still goes tumbling through the sluices alongside. Into the home run now to Llanfair-Carreinio. The line has one more problem to face. It is now right alongside the edge of the River Banui, and on it is another mill, Dolrid Mill. There wasn't much space, and the original planners declared that the line would have to be squeezed past the mill, and that's just what it does. You can almost touch the old water wheel as the line goes into the squeeze. Around the last corner, and through the tall grass and the trees and the flowers that seem never to have left the track all the way, and alongside the main road, and Llanfair-Carreinio ahead. 9.5 miles from Sylvain. Home signal box, and the volunteers who man it have to be as careful and as disciplined as any professional signal. The staff must be exchanged. This is one of the oldest railway safety precautions. No engine driver can take his train onwards unless he possesses the magic staff that makes him free of the next section of the line. Safely to journey's end. Llanfair-Carreinio Station, the headquarters of this little company of dedicated men, oh, and their patient wives, who have brought back to life the old Welshpool and Llanfair Railway and sent the cheerful sound of steam echoing again in the quiet valley of the Banbury. And why do they do it? Let Mr. Ken Fenton, fireman and a managing director from Birmingham, make his confession.
Well, I think it begins at a very early age when you're a small boy, if you're interested in railway engines, and you go to the station and you see these tremendous locomotives with all this steam and power and vigour, and you think, my, wouldn't it be marvellous if I could drive one of those? And then when you get older, if it persists, well then, nowadays you can join a company like this and you have an opportunity to really achieve your ambition.
And who wouldn't delight to achieve his ambition of driving a railway train that comes to a delightful full stop in Llanfair Cyreinion, Llanfair of the rich valley, of the bright salmon stream of the Banwy, Llanfair of the green hills. Could any railway passenger find a better place to answer the call, all change? Yes, all change for unspoilt Wales. Panting up the mountains, chugging through the vales, go the gallant little railway lines of Wales. The firebox glows, the pistons gleam, the engines puffing celestial steam, and the Welshpool Llanfair trains on hand to take you through the kindly borderland. And the land of my fathers looks twice as fine. You see it from a carriage on a railway line.